I watched my sister throw my 6-year-old daughter into the deep end of the pool, and in that moment, I knew I would never speak to my family again. The water swallowed Arya whole. Her tiny arms flailed as she sank beneath the surface, her mouth open in a scream that turned to bubbles. I was 20 feet away coming back from the restroom, and I saw it all happen in slow motion. Janelle had grabbed my daughter by the waist, lifted her high above her head like some kind of trophy, and hurled her into 12 feet of water with a force that seemed almost gleeful. My daughter, who was terrified of water. My daughter, who had been clinging to the edge of the kiddie pool just minutes before, trembling as I held her hand. I didn't think. I just ran and dove in, still wearing my cover-up, my healing surgical scar, screaming in protest as I hit the water. The chlorine burned my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed Arya as she sank, her little body rigid with terror, and pulled her to the surface. She was choking, gasping, her eyes wild with fear as she wrapped her arms around my neck so tight I could barely breathe. When I dragged us both to the edge, no one moved to help. My mother sat in her lounge chair, martini in hand, one eyebrow raised. My father kept scrolling through his phone. Derek, Janelle's husband, just stared. And Janelle, she was smiling. Actually smiling like she'd just done something clever. If you're a parent who's had to protect your child from the people who were supposed to love them most, hit that like button. Subscribe, because this story gets so much worse before it gets better. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done, because I promise you what I did next changed everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, to how we ended up at that resort in the first place. I met Simon when I was 23, fresh out of college and working my first real job at a tech startup in Austin. He was the senior developer, quiet and thoughtful, with dark hair that fell into his eyes when he was concentrating on code. We bonded over late-night debugging sessions and terrible office coffee, and within a year we were married. Within 2 years, I was pregnant with Arya. My family seemed happy for me, at least on the surface. My mother, Patricia, made all the right noises about being excited for her first grandchild. My father, Robert, wrote us a check for the down payment on our first house. And Janelle, my older sister by 4 years, threw me a baby shower that looked perfect in photos but felt hollow in person. Everything with my family always looked perfect in photos. The cracks had always been there, I just hadn't wanted to see them. Growing up, Janelle was the golden child. She was bold, confident, beautiful in that effortless way that made people want to be around her. I was quieter, more academic, the daughter who got straight A's but never quite measured up. When Janelle dropped out of college to marry Derek, a real estate developer with money, my parents threw them a wedding that cost more than my entire education. When I graduated summa cum laude, my mother sent flowers to my apartment with a card that said, "Proud of you, sweetheart," but neither of them came to the ceremony. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their validation. I had Simon, and soon I had Arya, and that was enough. Arya came into the world during a thunderstorm, her first cry competing with the crack of lightning. She was perfect, tiny fingers that gripped mine like she'd never let go, dark eyes that seemed to see right through me. Simon cried when he held her, and I fell in love with him all over again, watching him become a father. The first few years were hard in the way all new parent years are hard, but we were happy. Simon's career took off, and he started his own consulting firm. I went back to work part-time, managing investments for a boutique firm that let me work remotely. We were comfortable, not rich, but stable, able to save and plan for Arya's future. My family, meanwhile, was falling apart financially, though I didn't know the extent of it at first. Janelle and Derek had 2 kids, Zach and Paige, and they lived in a house that was too big, drove cars that were too expensive, took vacations they couldn't afford. Derek's real estate business started struggling after the market shifted, but they kept spending like nothing had changed. My parents had retired early, banking on investments that didn't pan out the way they'd hoped, and suddenly their comfortable retirement looked a lot less comfortable. That's when the calls started. First from my mother, casual mentions of how tight money was, how the property taxes on their house had gone up again. Then from Janelle, complaining about how Derek's business wasn't bringing in what it used to, how expensive kids were, how her car was having problems, and then more directly the asks for help. Could Simon and I loan them money for my parents' mortgage? Just until they got back on their feet. Could I co-sign for Janelle's new car since her credit was having some issues? It was just a formality. She promised she'd make all the payments. Could I help with Zach's private school tuition? It was such a good school, he was thriving there. It would be such a shame if he had to leave. I said yes. Over and over, I said yes. Because that's what family does, right? Simon wasn't thrilled about it, but he supported my decision. We wrote checks, we co-signed loans, we bailed them out when Derek's business finally collapsed and they were facing foreclosure. We gave and gave and gave, and they took and took and took. And never once did they say thank you. Not really. Oh, there were the performative thank yous, the "you're such a lifesaver" texts, but there was never any real gratitude. Instead, there was entitlement. There was my mother calling me when she wanted money, but never calling just to see how Arya was doing. There was Janelle borrowing thousands and then posting Instagram photos from expensive restaurants. There was my father making comments about how Simon and I were doing well for ourselves with this edge of resentment, like we didn't deserve what we'd worked for. But I kept telling myself it was fine. They were family. This was what you did for family. Arya was 4 when she developed her fear of water. We'd taken her to the community pool for swim lessons, excited to help her learn. But the instructor was impatient, the other kids were loud, and when Arya slipped under the water for just a second, she panicked. She came up coughing and crying, and from that moment on, she was terrified. Bath time became a struggle. Going near any body of water made her anxious. We tried everything: gentle encouragement, professional help, letting her go at her own pace. Slowly, she was getting better. By the time she was 6, she could stand in the kiddie pool if I held her hand. My family thought this was ridiculous. Janelle's kids, Zach and Paige, were like fish in water, fearless and confident. My mother made comments about how I was coddling Arya, how I was making her weak by accommodating her fear. My father said I needed to just throw her in the deep end, that's how he learned to swim, and it hadn't hurt him. Janelle laughed and said kids today were too soft, too dramatic, that Arya just needed a reality check. I defended my daughter. I explained trauma, I explained patience, I explained that pushing her would only make it worse. They rolled their eyes. They changed the subject. They made it clear they thought I was being an overprotective, hysterical mother. So when Janelle invited us to join them at a luxury resort for a long weekend, I was hesitant. Simon was out of town for work, and I knew the trip would revolve around the pool. But my mother called personally, said it had been so long since we'd all been together, said Arya needed to spend time with her cousins, said I needed to stop being so isolated and let my daughter experience normal family activities. I gave in. I always gave in. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in June, the Texas heat already oppressive, even though it wasn't quite summer yet. The resort was beautiful, all Spanish tile and palm trees with 3 different pools, including a lazy river and a kiddie pool with a splash pad. Arya was nervous the moment she saw the water, her little hand squeezing mine tight. We settled into our room, and I changed Arya into her swimsuit, the purple one with the ruffles that she'd picked out herself. She looked so small in it, her legs still chubby with toddler fat even though she was 6, her hair in 2 braids, that Simon had learned to do before he left for his trip. I promised her we'd just stay in the kiddie pool, just get our feet wet, nothing scary. When we got to the pool area, Janelle's family was already there. Zach, who was 8, and Paige, who was 7, were cannonballing into the deep end, shrieking with laughter. Derek was on his phone by the cabana, barely watching them. My parents were set up under an umbrella with a pitcher of mojitos, looking like they were on a cruise ship rather than babysitting grandchildren. Janelle spotted us and waved her perfect manicure, catching the light. She was wearing a designer bikini that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, the mortgage payment that I was helping my parents make. Her body was flawless, the result of a personal trainer and a plastic surgeon, both of which I suspected I'd helped pay for through various loans that never got paid back. I guided Arya to the kiddie pool, away from the deep water and the chaos. The kiddie pool was maybe 18 inches deep, warm and calm, with a little mushroom fountain in the middle. Arya stood at the edge, her toes curling against the hot concrete, her eyes wide. I got in first, the water barely reaching my knees, and held out my hands. She hesitated, and I saw my mother watching us, her mouth tight with disapproval. But I didn't care. I smiled at my daughter and said, "It's okay, baby. I've got you. It's just like a big bathtub." Slowly, so slowly, Arya sat down on the edge and slid into the water. She gasped when it touched her stomach, but I was right there, my hands on her waist, steadying her. Her little fingers dug into my arms, but she didn't cry. She was trying so hard to be brave. We stood like that for maybe 10 minutes, just her getting used to the sensation of water around her legs. I talked to her in a low, calm voice, pointing out the other little kids playing the way the water sparkled in the sunday. I felt her start to relax just slightly, her grip on my arms loosening by millimeters. That's when Janelle called out from across the pool deck. "Leah, come over here for a sec." I looked over. She was waving me toward their cabana, and my mother was gesturing too, that imperious little hand wave that meant now. I looked down at Arya. "I'll be right back, sweetheart. Stay right here in the shallow part, okay? Don't move." She nodded, her face serious, and sat down in the water so it came up to her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, and I could see she was already counting in her head the coping mechanism her therapist had taught her. I climbed out and walked over to the cabana, water dripping from my cover-up. The walk was maybe 50 feet, but it felt like miles. Something in my gut was twisting, some primal maternal instinct, telling me not to leave her, but I ignored it. I was only going to be gone for a minute. What could happen in a minute? "What's up?" I asked when I reached them. My mother didn't even look at me, just held out her empty glass. "Be a dear and get me another mojito from the bar." That was it. That was why she'd called me over. To refill her drink. I felt the familiar flash of irritation but swallowed it down. "Sure. Anyone else want anything?" I took orders, 3 drinks total, and headed toward the poolside bar. The bartender was busy with a large group, and I stood there waiting, tapping my foot, counting the seconds I was away from Arya. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. 4. Finally, I got the drinks and turned back toward the cabana. I could see the kiddie pool from where I was standing, could see the little mushroom fountain, but Arya wasn't where I'd left her. My heart jumped into my throat, and I started walking faster, the drinks sloshing in their glasses. And then I saw her. Or rather, I saw Janelle holding her. My sister had somehow crossed the pool deck, had reached into the kiddie pool, had grabbed my daughter under her arms, and was carrying her toward the deep end. Arya was struggling her legs, kicking her voice high and frightened, even though I couldn't hear the words from where I was. I dropped the drinks. The glasses shattered on the concrete, but I didn't stop. I was running now, my flip-flops slapping against the ground, my voice tearing out of my throat. "Janelle." "No. Put her down." But I was too far away. And Janelle, my sister, the person who was supposed to love my daughter, who was supposed to be her aunt and her protector, looked directly at me with this smile on her face. This cold, calculated smile. And then she threw Arya into the deep end of the pool. The splash seemed to echo across the entire resort. Time stopped. I saw Arya's face, saw her mouth open in a scream, saw the terror in her eyes as she fell. And then the water closed over her head and she was gone. I hit the pool at a run and dove in without breaking stride. My cover-up tangled around my legs, my surgical scar from the C-section I'd had just 2 months ago, with complications tore open, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the small body sinking into the blue depths below me. The pool was 12 feet deep in that section. Arya was tiny, barely 45 pounds, and she was sinking like a stone because she was frozen with fear. I grabbed her around the waist and kicked hard toward the surface, my lungs burning the wound in my abdomen, screaming. We broke the surface, and Arya sucked in air with a horrible gasping sound, immediately starting to choke on the water she'd inhaled. She was coughing and sobbing and hyperventilating all at once, her entire body shaking as she wrapped herself around me like a koala, her legs around my waist, her arms around my neck, her face buried in my shoulder. I swam to the edge and tried to climb out, but between Arya clinging to me and the pain in my stomach, I couldn't lift us both. I looked around for help, for anyone to reach down and pull us out. Derek was still on his phone. My father had his eyes closed, sunglasses on, like nothing had happened. My mother was sipping the last of her old drink, watching with this expression of mild curiosity. And Janelle was standing right there at the edge, her perfect manicure resting on her hip, not offering to help. Finally, a lifeguard appeared, a teenage boy who looked terrified. He reached down and helped pull Arya out and then helped me climb the ladder. I could feel blood running down my leg from my reopened incision, but I didn't care. I grabbed Arya from the lifeguard and held her against me, her whole body convulsing with sobs. "Mama," she gasped between cries. "Mama, the first almost died. I almost died. There was water in my nose and my mouth, and I couldn't breathe, and I was sinking, and I couldn't stop sinking. I know, baby. I know. You're safe now. I've got you." I looked up at Janelle. She was still standing there, still smiling like she'd just performed some kind of public service. "What the hell did you just do?" My voice came out low and cold, the kind of cold that comes from absolute fury barely contained. Janelle shrugged. Actually shrugged. "Oh my God, Leah, relax. It was just a little push. She needed to get over her fear. You're turning her into a neurotic mess with all your coddling. I did her a favor. Now she knows she won't actually die if she gets in the pool." I stared at her. I stared at this woman who shared my DNA, who I'd grown up with, who I'd defended to Simon when he said my family took advantage of me, who I'd given thousands of dollars to, who I'd bailed out over and over. I stared at her and truly saw her for the first time. She was a monster. She had always been a monster. I had just been too desperate for her approval to see it. You threw my 6-year-old daughter into a pool where she couldn't touch bottom. I said each word precise. You did it on purpose. You did it knowing she's terrified of water. You did it knowing she can't swim. You did it because you thought it was funny. I did it because she needs to toughen up. Janelle shot back. Jesus, Leah, stop being so dramatic. She's fine. She didn't die. Those TikTok parents do way worse. She learned a valuable lesson today about not being such a little wimp. I heard my mother's voice, then languid and unconcerned. Leah, honey, you're making a scene. Janelle was just trying to help. You know how sensitive you get about Arya. We've all been worried about how you're raising her. I turned to look at my mother. She was reapplying lipstick, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. My father still had his eyes closed, pretending he hadn't seen his granddaughter nearly drown. Derek was finally looking up from his phone, but only because the people at nearby tables had stopped their conversations and were staring at our family. She threw my daughter into deep water, I said, louder now. She could have drowned. She could have died. My father opened his eyes then and sighed like I was being tedious. No one died, Leah. You're always so dramatic, making everything into a crisis. Janelle was trying to help the girl. Lord knows someone needs to, since you're determined to turn her into some kind of fragile little flower. Something inside me broke then. Not broke like shattered, but broke like when you break chains. Suddenly, everything was crystal clear. These people, my parents, my sister, they didn't love me. They had never loved me. I was a bank account to them, a resource to be exploited. And now they'd hurt my daughter, my baby, and they felt entitled to do it. They felt justified. Arya was still sobbing against my chest, her whole body shaking, and I could feel her heart racing like a trapped bird. This was their fault. This trauma that would probably take years to heal was their fault. And they didn't even care. I stood up, Arya still in my arms, ignoring the blood running down my leg and the pain in my stomach. I looked at each of them in turn, my mother with her lipstick, my father with his sunglasses, Janelle with her smirk, Derek with his phone. I will never forgive you for this, I said quietly. Any of you, we're leaving. And don't bother trying to contact me. We're done. Janelle laughed, actually laughed. Oh, come on, Leah. You'll get over it. You always do. Remember when I borrowed your car and crashed it? Remember when Mom forgot your birthday 3 years in a row? Remember when Dad said your wedding was too small and embarrassing? You got mad then too, but you came back. Because you need us. I looked at her, at this woman who had just articulated the entire pattern of my life in 3 sentences. She was right. They had hurt me over and over, and I'd always come back, always made excuses, always believed that this time would be different, that eventually they would see my value, would appreciate me, would love me the way I desperately needed them to. But they never would. And more importantly, I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had Simon. I had Arya. I had a daughter who was sobbing in my arms because her aunt had traumatized her for fun, and that was more important than any family obligation. You're wrong, I said. I don't need you. I never needed you. I just wanted you to love me. But you can't. You're not capable of it. And I'm done pretending that you are. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, sharp now with anger. Leah Marie Patterson, you get back here this instant. You're being completely ridiculous. Janelle, apologize to your sister even though she's being a drama queen. I heard Janelle's voice, petulant now. I'm not apologizing. I didn't do anything wrong. I kept walking. I carried Arya through the resort lobby, both of us dripping wet, me bleeding onto the marble floor. The concierge started to say something, but took one look at my face and closed his mouth. I made it to our room, got us both inside, and locked the door. In the bathroom, I set Arya down gently and peeled off her swimsuit. She was still crying softer now, hiccuping sobs that broke my heart. I wrapped her in a towel and held her rocking back and forth, whispering that she was safe, that I would never let anyone hurt her again, that I was so sorry. My phone started ringing. My mother. I declined the call. It rang again. Janelle. Declined. Again. My father. Declined. Text messages started flooding in. From my mother, this is ridiculous. Get over yourself and come back down here. From Janelle, wow, way to ruin a nice family vacation. Always have to make everything about you. From my father, your mother is very upset. You need to apologize. I turned my phone off. That night, after I'd gotten Arya to sleep, after I'd bandaged my reopened incision and taken painkillers for the throbbing ache, after I'd cried silently in the bathroom so my daughter wouldn't hear, I turned my phone back. Anand called Simon. He was in a hotel room in Chicago wrapping up his consulting project. I told him everything, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. There was a long silence after I finished, and then Simon said in a voice I'd never heard from him before, quiet and absolutely furious, "I'm getting on a plane. I'll be there in 4 hours. Pack our things. We're leaving." "Simon, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Someone threw our daughter into a pool and watched her nearly drown. Your family stood there and watched it happen and then told you that you were overreacting. We're leaving. Tonight." And Leah, his voice softened slightly. "We're done with them. All of them. Do you understand? We're completely done." I felt something in my chest loosen, something I didn't even know had been tight. Permission. He was giving me permission to do what I'd been too afraid to do on my own. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." Simon arrived just after midnight. He came straight to our room, still in his business suit, his carry-on bag in one hand. The moment I opened the door, he pulled me into his arms and held me so tight I could barely breathe. Over his shoulder, I could see Arya asleep in her bed, her face puffy from crying, one hand clutching her stuffed elephant. "Is she okay?" he asked against my hair. "No," I said honestly. "But she will be." We packed in silence, neither of us wanting to wake Arya. Simon checked us out online, paid the early departure fee without blinking, and arranged for a car service to take us home. We were on the road by 2 in the morning, Arya sleeping between us in the back seat, her head on my lap. As we drove through the dark Texas countryside, Simon took my hand. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. "About them. About all of it." I thought about the mortgage I was helping pay for my parents' house, the car loan I'd co-signed for Janelle, the private school tuition I'd covered for Zach, the emergency funds I'd provided over and over, the emotional labor of always being the understanding one, the flexible one, the one who forgave, the lifetime of being the daughter who wasn't quite good enough, the sister who wasn't quite as important. "I want to cut them off," I said. "Completely. Financially, emotionally, all of it. I want to get a restraining order if I have to. I want them to never come near Arya again." "Is that crazy?" Simon squeezed my hand. "No. It's the sanest thing you've ever said about your family." The next morning, from our own home with Arya safe in her own bed, I started making calls. First to the bank to inform them I was removing myself as a co-signer on my parents' mortgage. Without my income and credit backing the loan, their interest rate would skyrocket. They'd have to refinance or sell. That wasn't my problem anymore. Second, to the auto finance company to pull my guarantee on Janelle's car loan. Same situation. Without me backing it, she'd have to refinance at a much higher rate or the car would be repossessed. Not my problem. Third, to the private school to inform them I would no longer be paying Zach's tuition. They could work it out with his parents or he could transfer. Not my problem. Fourth, to our cell phone provider, removing my parents and Janelle's family from our family plan. They'd have to get their own accounts now. Not my problem. I made a spreadsheet of every loan, every debt, every financial tie I had to them. It was staggering. Over the past 5 years, I'd given or guaranteed more than $200,000. $200,000 to people who had let someone hurt my child and then told me I was overreacting. I called our lawyer and asked about restraining orders. He asked what had happened, and I told him everything. There was a long pause, and then he said, "Mrs. Harris, I think we can make a very strong case here. What your sister did was assault. What your parents did was negligent supervision at best. Do you want to press charges?" I thought about it. Thought about Janelle in handcuffs, my parents having to answer questions from police. The vindictive part of me wanted it. But the exhausted part of me, the part that just wanted peace, said not yet. But I want the restraining order. I want it documented. I want them to know that if they ever come near my daughter again, I will absolutely press charges. I'll draw up the papers. Finally, I blocked every single one of their numbers. My mother, my father, Janelle, Derek. All of them. I blocked them on my phone, on social media, on email. I changed our home alarm code. I called Arya's school and explicitly removed them from the list of approved adults who could pick her up or make decisions for her. I made it clear to the school administration that if any of them showed up, the police should be called immediately. By the end of that day, I had severed every tie. Every single one. And the moment I finished, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. The retaliation started almost immediately. My voicemail filled up even though they were blocked, the messages going straight to a folder I never checked. My email spam filter caught dozens of messages. They tried to reach me through old college friends, through distant relatives, through anyone who might still have contact with me. The messages that filtered through that got past my blocks through mutual contacts were predictable. My mother crying that I was being cruel, that she couldn't believe I would abandon my family over something so small. Janelle furious that I'd ruined her credit, that her car was being repossessed, that I was a spiteful bitch who couldn't take a joke. My father disappointed, saying I was being immature and vindictive, that I was hurting them to hurt them and it was beneath me. Not once did any of them apologize. Not once did anyone say, "I'm sorry we let Arya get hurt." It was all about what I had done to them, how I was the villain in this story. I showed some of the messages to Simon. He read them in silence and then deleted every single one. "You don't need to see this," he said. "They're trying to manipulate you. Don't let them back in." Arya was struggling. She couldn't take baths anymore, only quick showers with the water barely on. She had nightmares every single night, waking up screaming about drowning, about water in her lungs, about no one helping her. She refused to go near our apartment complex. Pool wouldn't even walk past it. Her therapist said she'd been re-traumatized, that the progress we'd made over the past 2 years had been destroyed in one moment of cruelty. I spent those first few weeks holding her through the nightmares, sitting with her during shower time, reassuring her over and over that she was safe. Simon rearranged his work schedule so one of us was always home. We were a unit now, the three of us against the world, and we protected each other fiercely. 2 weeks after the resort incident, I got a call from Arya's school. The secretary's voice was tight with concern. "Mrs. Harris, I'm calling because Arya isn't in her classroom. She was marked present this morning, but when her teacher went to bring the class back from recess, Arya wasn't there. We've checked everywhere." My blood went cold. "What do you mean she's not there? Who signed her out?" "No one signed her out. She just disappeared from the playground." I was in my car before she finished the sentence, Simon scrambling into the passenger seat. I called 911 as I drove, one hand on the wheel, one hand on my phone, breaking every speed limit. "My daughter has been taken from her school. I know who has her. My sister and my parents, the ones on the restricted list. They've taken her." The 911 operator tried to keep me calm, tried to get details, but all I could think about was Arya, terrified, with people who had already hurt her once. People who didn't believe she deserved protection. People who thought her trauma was weakness that needed to be beaten out of her. The operator put out an alert, got in touch with the school dispatched officers. And then with my heart in my throat, I heard her say, "Officers have located your daughter. She's at the public pool on Riverside Drive. Police are en route." Of course. Of course they'd taken her to a pool. They were trying to fix her. They were going to throw her in the water again and make her get over it. I made it to the pool in 7 minutes, which should have been a 15-minute drive. Simon was calling our lawyer, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. The parking lot was chaos, 2 police cars already there, lights flashing. I abandoned the car in the middle of a parking space and ran. Inside the pool complex, I could hear Arya crying before I saw her. That high, terrified crying that she only did when she was completely overwhelmed. I shoved past a family coming out, ignored the teenager at the check-in desk, and burst onto the pool deck. There in the corner by the shallow end was my 6-year-old daughter. She was wrapped in a towel, backed up against the wall, her eyes wide and terrified. Standing around her in a semicircle were my mother, my father, Janelle, and a confused-looking swim instructor who clearly had no idea what he'd gotten himself into. Janelle was holding Arya's swimsuit, the purple one, with ruffles that she hadn't worn since that day at the resort. "Come on, Arya, just put it on. We're going to have so much fun. You're going to learn to swim today." Doesn't that sound exciting? My mother was crouched down, trying to seem gentle, but her voice had that edge to it. "Your mother has been filling your head with nonsense about being scared. But we know you're braver than that. You're a big girl now. Big girls aren't afraid of water." And my father standing there with his arms crossed, looking disappointed. "We're your family. We know what's best for you. Your mother is being selfish, keeping you afraid. We're going to help you." Arya saw me, and the sound that came out of her was pure relief and terror mixed together. "Mommy." She ran toward me, or tried to, but Janelle grabbed her arm. "Arya, wait, we're not done here. You haven't even gotten in the pool yet." I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides, and I didn't care that there were police behind me, didn't care that there were families watching. I grabbed Janelle's wrist and squeezed hard until she let go of my daughter. "Don't you ever touch her again." Janelle stumbled back, and I scooped Arya into my arms. She wrapped herself around me, sobbing into my shoulder, her whole body shaking. "They took me from school. They said you said it was okay, but I knew you didn't. I was so scared. They were going to make me get in the water. I told them no, but they wouldn't listen. I know, baby. I know. I'm here now. No one is going to make you do anything. I turned to face my family, these people who shared my DNA but were strangers to me now. The police officers were approaching, and I could see Simon coming up behind them, his face pale with fury. My mother stood up, and she had the audacity to look offended. Leah, this is ridiculous. We picked her up from school because you're clearly not handling her issues appropriately. Someone needs to help this child, and if you won't do it, we will. You kidnapped her, I said, my voice deadly calm. You went to her school where you are explicitly forbidden from taking her, and you removed her without permission. You brought her to a pool knowing she's traumatized. You tried to force her into a swimsuit and into the water against her will. In what world did you think this was acceptable? We're her grandparents, my father said, like that explained everything. We have rights. No, I said. You don't. Not anymore. One of the police officers stepped forward, an older woman with kind eyes who had clearly dealt with family disputes before. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here? I told her everything. I started with the resort, with Janelle throwing Arya into the deep end. I told her about cutting off contact about the restraining order we were pursuing. I told her about the call from school about racing here to find my daughter being held against her will and pressured to do something that terrified her. I told her everything, and with every word I watched, my family's faces change from indignant to uncertain to actually worried. The swim instructor, a college-age kid who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, spoke up. For what it's worth, officer, the little girl was clearly distressed. She kept saying no and crying, and these folks kept insisting it was fine, that she just needed to get over her fear. I told them I wasn't comfortable forcing a child into the water, but they said they were family and they knew what was best. The officer looked at my parents, at Janelle, at Derek, who had been standing silently in the background this whole time. Did you have permission to remove this child from school? We're her grandparents, my mother repeated, but her voice was less certain now. That's not what I asked. Did you have permission from her legal guardians to take her from school premises? Silence. I need to see identification from all of you, please. As my family fumbled for their wallets, the officer turned to me. Do you want to press charges? I looked at them, really looked at them. My mother, who had never once called just to see how I was doing. My father, who had missed every important moment of my life because he was too busy or too uninterested. Janelle, who had hurt my daughter and felt justified doing it. These people who had taken and taken and taken and given nothing back except pain. Arya's arms were tight around my neck, her face buried in my shoulder. I could feel her heart racing, could feel how small and fragile she was. This was my baby. My responsibility. My child to protect. Yes, I said clearly. I want to press charges for custodial interference at minimum. And I want a restraining order filed today. My mother gasped. Janelle's mouth fell open. My father looked like I'd slapped him. You can't be serious, Janelle said, her voice rising. We're family. You can't have us arrested. We were trying to help. The officer held up a hand. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. You removed a minor from school property without parental permission. That's a crime. The fact that you're related doesn't change that. She started taking their information, and another officer was talking into his radio. Simon came up beside me and put his hand on my back, solid and steady. He didn't say anything, just stood there as a reminder that I wasn't alone in this, that he supported me completely. The swim instructor apologized to me quietly. I'm so sorry, ma'am. They said they were family and they seemed so certain. I should have checked with the parents first. It's not your fault, I told him. They're very good at seeming reasonable. As the officers finished up, as they informed my parents and Janelle that they would need to come to the station as they served them, with temporary restraining orders that would be in effect until the court hearing, my mother tried one last time. Leah, please, don't do this. We're your family. We love you. We love Arya. We were just trying to help her. You're taking this way too far. I looked at her, at this woman who had given birth to me but had never really been a mother. You threw my daughter into a pool and watched her nearly drown, I said quietly. You mocked her trauma. You called me dramatic for protecting her. You came to her school, violated a restraining order. I was in the process of getting kidnapped her and tried to traumatize her again. And you think I'm taking this too far? We made a mistake. No, a mistake is forgetting to call. A mistake is being late to pick someone up. What you did was deliberate. You hurt my child on purpose twice, and you felt justified doing it both times. That's not a mistake. That's cruelty. I turned away from her from all of them and carried Arya out of the pool complex. Behind me, I could hear my mother crying, Janelle arguing with the officers, my father trying to smooth things over with his reasonable voice. I didn't care. I was done. In the car, Arya finally stopped crying. She was hiccuping still, her face blotchy and swollen, but she looked up at me with those big dark eyes and said, "Are they going to try to make me swim again?" "No, baby. Never. I promise. They're not allowed to come near you ever again. And if they try, the police will stop them." "Good," she said simply. Then after a pause, "I don't like them anymore." "That's okay. You don't have to like them. You don't have to love them just because they're related to you. Love is something you give to people who deserve it, who protect you and keep you safe. They didn't do that." She thought about this, her little face serious. "You and Daddy keep me safe. Always, I promised. Always." The court hearing for the restraining order was 2 weeks later. My family showed up with a lawyer, an expensive one that I'm sure they couldn't afford. I wondered if they'd found yet another relative to mooch off of another bank account to drain. Their lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone who was keeping grandparents from their grandchild over a minor disagreement. He talked about family bonds and forgiveness and how children need extended family support. Our lawyer presented the medical records from my reopened surgical wound from diving in to save Arya. The therapist's notes about Arya's trauma and nightmares. The school's incident report about the unauthorized pickup. Witness statements from the swim instructor and other pool patrons who had seen them trying to force Arya into the water. And most damning, the video from the resort security cameras that I had subpoenaed showing Janelle grabbing Arya and throwing her into the deep end while everyone else watched. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, watched the video twice. Then she looked at my family with an expression of pure disgust. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said. "You threw a 6-year-old child who couldn't swim into 12 feet of water. You watched her mother have to jump in and rescue her. You then 2 weeks later removed this same child from school without permission and attempted to force her into a pool against her will. And you're arguing that the mother is being unreasonable by wanting to protect her daughter from you." Janelle tried to speak. "Your Honor, we were just trying to help." "I don't want to hear it," the judge cut her off. "I've seen a lot of things in this courtroom, but I'm genuinely appalled by what I'm seeing here. What you did was assault. What you did was child endangerment. The only reason you're not facing criminal charges is because Mrs. Harris has shown remarkable restraint. She granted the restraining order immediately. 500 feet at all times. No contact whatsoever, direct or indirect. No third-party messages. No showing up at school or work or home. Violation would result in immediate arrest." As we left the courthouse, I could hear my mother sobbing my father, trying to reason with the judge's bailiff, Janelle's angry voice echoing down the hallway. I didn't turn around. Simon had Arya's hand and I had my head held high, and we walked out into the sunshine together. Life didn't magically get easier after that. Arya's nightmares continued for months. She started having anxiety about school, worried that someone else might take her. We had to increase her therapy sessions, work with her teachers to help her feel safe. She stopped going to birthday parties if they were at pools or water parks. She turned down playdates at friends' houses if they had pools. But slowly, gradually, she started to heal. The nightmares became less frequent. She could take showers without panicking. She even 6 months later agreed to go to a beach with us, though she stayed on the sand and just dug in the wet part near the water. The financial impact on my family was swift and brutal. Without my support, my parents' mortgage ballooned. They tried to refinance, but their credit wasn't good enough without me. They had to sell the house at a loss and move into a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. My mother had to get a job for the first time in 15 years working retail at a department store. Janelle's car was repossessed within a month. Without that car, she couldn't get to her job and she was fired. Derek's business never recovered and they filed for bankruptcy. Zach had to leave his private school and go to public school. They moved in with Derek's parents, a cramped arrangement that I heard through the grapevine was full of tension. I felt no sympathy. They had hurt my child. They had betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. The consequences of their actions were their own responsibility, not mine. My extended family tried to intervene. Aunts and uncles called, tried to mediate, suggested family therapy or reconciliation. I told them all the same thing. What happened wasn't a disagreement or a misunderstanding. It was assault. If a stranger had done what Janelle did, she'd be in jail. The fact that she was family didn't make it better, it made it worse. Most of them didn't understand. They thought I was holding a grudge, being unforgiving, putting my pride ahead of family. A few of them, a very few, watched the security camera video I offered to show them and went pale. Those were the ones who quietly stopped pushing for reconciliation and started checking in on Arya instead. 3 years passed. 3 years of peace, of healing, of building a life that didn't revolve around trying to earn approval from people who would never give it. Simon's business thrived. My career advanced. We bought a bigger house with a yard but no pool. Arya started 4th grade, still cautious around water but growing more confident in other areas. She learned to ride a bike, joined the art club, made friends who loved her for exactly who she was. And then I got pregnant again. It was a surprise, an unexpected joy. We told Arya first, and she was so excited to be a big sister that she immediately started planning how she'd teach the baby everything she knew. The baby came in early spring, a boy we named James, after Simon's father. He was healthy and loud and perfect, and Arya was instantly devoted to him. She helped with diaper changes, brought him toys, sang to him when he cried. She was a natural big sister. One Saturday afternoon, when James was 3 months old, we decided to take both kids to the local park. It had a small splash pad area, nothing deep, just fountains and sprinklers built into the ground. Arya had been watching other kids play there for months, and I could see her getting curious, but I never pushed. This particular day was hot, over 90 degrees, and the splash pad was crowded with families trying to cool off. We set up on a bench in the shade nearby James and his carrier. Arya was wearing her swimsuit under her clothes just in case, but she sat next to us coloring in a notebook. Then we heard a splash and a cry. A toddler, maybe 18 months old, had slipped on the wet ground and fallen face first into a shallow fountain. His mother was 20 feet away talking to another parent and hadn't seen. The toddler was flailing, disoriented, water running over his face as he tried to get up but kept slipping. He was in maybe 4 inches of water, but at that age it was enough to be dangerous. Before I could even move, Arya was on her feet. She ran across the splash pad, her flip-flops slapping on the wet concrete, and dropped to her knees next to the toddler. She got her arms under him and lifted him up, sitting him upright, steadying him until he caught his breath and stopped crying. The mother appeared a second later, scooping up her son, thanking Arya profusely. But I couldn't stop staring at my daughter. At this 9-year-old who was terrified of water, who still couldn't take a bath without anxiety, who had nightmares about drowning. She had run toward the water to help someone without even thinking about it. She came back to our bench, her legs wet, her hair dripping, and sat down like nothing had happened. She picked up her colored pencils and went back to her drawing. "Baby," I said carefully, "that was very brave." She looked up at me, those dark eyes so serious. He needed help. I couldn't just watch. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental. My daughter wasn't weak because she was afraid. Fear wasn't the opposite of bravery. Fear was something she felt, and bravery was what she did despite feeling it. Janelle and my parents had thought they were teaching her to be strong by forcing her to confront her fear, but all they'd done was add trauma on top of fear. Real strength was what Arya had just shown. The ability to feel afraid and still choose to act to help someone who needed it, even when it cost her something. That night, after both kids were in bed, I sat with Simon on our back porch. The air was cooling finally, the Texas heat breaking into something almost pleasant. Simon had his arm around me and I had my head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Cutting them off. The restraining order. All of it." I thought about it, really thought about it. I thought about the family gatherings I'd never attend, the relationships Arya and James would never have with their grandparents. I thought about the loneliness of those first few months when I'd reach for my phone to call my mom and remember I couldn't. I thought about the grief of losing people who were still alive. But then I thought about Arya, safe and healing and brave in her own way. I thought about James, who would grow up knowing he was protected, that his parents would always choose his well-being over obligation. I thought about the peace in our home, the lack of drama, the security of knowing that no one would hurt my children and get away with it. "No," I said. "I don't regret it. Not for a second. They thought I was being unreasonable. They thought I was overreacting. But this is my life now, Simon. Peace. Safety. Kids who know they're protected. If that's the price of cutting off toxic people, even family, I'd pay it 1,000 times over." He kissed the top of my head. "You're a good mother." "I try to be," I said. "Every single day I try to be." My family never reached out again after the restraining order. I heard through distant relatives that they blamed me for everything, that they told people I'd abandoned them over nothing, that I'd always been selfish and difficult. I heard that Janelle eventually divorced Derek, that my parents grew more bitter and isolated. I heard that Zach and Paige struggled in school, acting out, dealing with the instability in their home. I felt sad for the kids. They didn't choose their parents any more than I had. But I couldn't fix that. I couldn't save everyone. I could only protect the people I was responsible for, the children I'd brought into this world and promised to keep safe. Years from now, maybe Zach or Paige will reach out. Maybe they'll apologize for what their mother did or ask for a relationship with their cousins. Maybe they won't. Either way, the door to my life isn't locked, but it is firmly closed. To open it, someone would need to show genuine remorse, real change, and an understanding of why what happened was so wrong. I'm not holding my breath. For now, I have Simon. I have Arya, who is growing into a thoughtful, compassionate person who helps people even when it scares her. I have James, who is starting to take his first steps and lights up every room with his smile. I have a home full of love and laughter and peace. I have everything I need. And I finally feel free. They called me dramatic. They said I was overreacting. They insisted it was just family, just a joke, just a little push into the water. But protecting my daughter wasn't dramatic. Setting boundaries wasn't overreacting. And choosing peace over toxicity wasn't being cruel. It was being a mother. It was being the parent my daughter deserved. It was breaking a cycle of accepting unacceptable behavior because of shared DNA. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone you love? Have you ever been told you're overreacting when you know deep down that you're actually finally reacting appropriately? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe protecting your kids should always come first. And subscribe because I have more stories about choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and building the life you actually deserve rather than the one other people think you should accept.